Well, everyone, thank you so much for being here. We're at the third and final night of our 4 Pillars of Health 3-week session with Dr. Angela Falcone. Is there anybody that's new this week? All right, well, if you missed a class, I do have a few extras of the handouts. Bob can show you where they are. We do have refreshments, cookies. I didn't say nutritional refreshments, I just said there's some things over there.
Nothing that's on the 10-day reset.
He did, actually. I didn't bring it the first night.
We all need to cheat a little bit.
So, that's right. He said that it's okay. You can't do it every day, and you can't do it 3 times a day, which was a learning for me. So no, he did say we could have a cookie. It's okay to reward yourself once in a while. So before I remind you of what we're doing here, I want to mention that on your table you'll see some pieces of paper and pens. And as you know, the Adult Faith Formation Team, which is a group of about 15 parishioners who look at what it is that we are planning and offering to the adults. This is a little survey. We've had a really good and compact year, and even the year before when COVID was going on, we were doing a lot of things. And we'd like to get a sense, and since there's been 40 to 50 people here each night, we just thought this was a good test group to ask, what is it that you want to know more about? So by all means, you'll just take a minute or two, and if you don't see something on there that you're interested in, or something in specific you want more detail on, or you have a suggestion that's better detailed, just write it in. We're just curious about what you're thinking about what should be the next step for the Adult Faith Formation Committee. I see that Bob and I are here, and I also see the Bruns are here. Anybody else from the Adult Faith Formation Committee? No. But we are actively involved in planning these things. So, and I'll just remind you, as you're writing, that Dr. Falcone, you may remember for already the week that you've been here, but he is one of the founding board members and a partner in the U.S. Acute Care Solutions, which is the largest physician partnership in the acute care space, treating over 6 million patients annually. He trained as an emergency physician at Georgetown and George Washington University and has treated tens of thousands of patients in his 25-year career. And having seen the impact of chronic disease on so many of his patients, as well as some of his own personal experience, he became very interested in what were the markers or the drivers of long-term health and longevity. And it led him to a deeper study, and he signed up for a 2-year fellowship through the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine in San Diego, and he's completed that. So he really does come to us with a wealth of experience and a lot of good ideas, and you can tell he's healthy. So, yes. So with that, and at the very end, we'll say some formal thanks. And so, but for now, you're on. And please fill out those forms. Oh, and if you want to, you can leave them on your table, and we'll pick them up at the end.
Thank you, Maggie. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming back for round 3. Appreciate everybody being here. I see somebody, at least one person with a cap jersey, cap sweater on. Yeah. I mean, I was there Monday night when they lost in overtime. It could have been a 3-1, but sadly they're tied at 2 with Florida, so we'll see how they do tonight. Yeah. So I may be checking my phone later on. Thank you again. Thanks for the feedback. I've enjoyed the conversations, and I know we went into some rabbit holes last week, but that's what I enjoy. I enjoy just answering questions. So anytime you want to stop, I'm happy to stop and go wherever you want to go. So thank you for doing that. But we've got some work to do tonight. So we talked the first night about kind of the drivers of chronic disease, what exactly was the, what was underlying, or some theories about what was underlying all these issues, and then we talked a little bit about the 4 pillars and certainly focused on mental resiliency. Last week we talked about nutrition and the things that you can do personally to really change those signals that nutrition gives to your DNA to be able to be healthier or unfortunately to be sicker. And some of that is sometimes confusing, and we kind of walk through some of that. And tonight is all about movement and sleep and trying to pull everything all together. Because you've heard a lot of information, and I know it's kind of like a little bit of fire hose at times. But I just wanted to try and touch on some of the highlights. And certainly there's a lot more stuff on my website. I write about this all the time on my blogs. So feel free to kind of peruse that for those of you on Facebook or Instagram. feel free to connect with me and like my postings. So we talked about how the food you put in your body, how you treat your body, and really how you keep your mind sharp as long as possible based on those 4 things. And remember what we talked about the first week, just to review very briefly. We talked about kind of starting a mindfulness practice. And I'm not going to ask how many started a new nutrition practice last week, so I'm going to wait till after this week so we can enjoy the cookies at the end, and then we can start our resets next week. But really, mindfulness is all about how you calm your mind. A lot of that can be through the place that we're in, through prayer and spirituality and our faith. But there are other things that you can do. Breath work is a great thing. Meditation is a great thing. Time in nature, walking around outside. I was sitting on my back deck watching the birds try and build a nest above my head. The swallows are back. And really kind of strengthening your tribe, making those social connections. One of the biggest epidemics that we have is an epidemic of loneliness. Unfortunately, they released the data for suicides in the United States, and unfortunately in 2021, they exceeded the amount in 2020, which was over 90,000 people killing themselves, which is such a sad statistic. And certainly COVID has not made that any better. So, and then obviously it's about, kind of one of the reasons we're here is to strengthen the faith, and with the people around us, how do we do that? So, and nutrition was pretty simple. You start where you are. And no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. And basically, whatever you're going to do, start by trying to limit the things that are going to have a negative impact on your body. Focus on what you can control. There's this saying, I heard this from Weight Watchers, somebody mentioned this, that was, if you say no once in the grocery store, you don't have to say no 10 times when you get home. I always thought that was kind of a cool saying. Okay, so whenever you're at the grocery store, pick out the things that are going to be healthy for you, and you go from there. Keep it simple. Try and eat mostly a plant-based diet. 85% of what we should put in our body should be plant-based. Minimize processed meats, minimize red meats. If you're going to do that, make sure they're grass-fed. If you're going to have fish, make sure it's wild caught, because there are toxins that build up, and farm-raised fish has high levels of toxins. I have one patient right now that has mercury toxicity that I'm actually detoxing, and he got it from eating, he loved salmon. So he ate a lot of farm-raised salmon, probably a couple times a week. And over time, that mercury basically built up in his body, and now he's on a detox protocol for the next 3 months. So it is real, and I encourage.
Mercury's not in like shrimp, scallops, or
usually the bigger fish.
The bigger fish.
Yeah, but salmon is not a large fish. The farm-raised ones, they're the ones you worry about. Things like swordfish, halibut, tuna, those are definitely have higher concentrations of mercury.
Swordfish, any of those big fish.
Any of the big game fish, really, because they're eating the smaller fish and it's concentrating the mercury in their body.
Is that what those?
Yep. Unfortunately, because they're the ones that everyone likes. And make sure there are a lot of food sensitivities that we talked about. Dairy is one of the major ones. Wheat is another one. So just those are the things to be careful of. You got a copy of the 10-day reset that Dr. Mark Hyman had in one of his books that I plagiarized and sent out. I didn't credit, so you can certainly try that when this is over. So today's all about movement. So which one are you? So when we talk about movement, we talk about 3 real areas that I want you to focus on. One is to maintain muscle mass, which we're going to talk about, and there's a medical condition for the loss of muscle mass over time that it affects all of us. The second one is all about balance and flexibility. Certainly as we age, and as all of us know, your balance is an issue for many, many people. And it has a lot to do with how we kind of sense our environment. Falls are very common, especially as we age, and bad things happen when you fall. I saw hundreds, if not thousands, of patients with hip fractures and head injuries from falls, just by falling down a flight of steps or falling in their own home. And once something like that happens, it dramatically affects the trajectory of your life. So you want to try and prevent that as much as possible. And the lower right picture is to represent your cardiovascular health. And you really have to focus on those three areas: maintaining muscle mass, watching to make sure you maintain balance and flexibility, and then how you continue to maintain aerobic capacity over time. And I'm going to kind of give you a prescription for how to do that. But let's talk a little bit about how people move. And there's a difference between, and I'll talk about this towards the end, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, the blue zones. In the centenarian study, the people that have lived to over 100 years of age, and they're not going to Gold's Gym 3 times a week, right? They're just being active on a day-to-day basis. So you can do any of those things that are in this picture, but the easiest thing to do is obviously to walk. So the sad news is, there was a study that's done for the last 20 years called NHANES. It's a study for over, oops, there we go. My computer just flashed.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. So there's a study called NHANES, which is, that is a, back. That's kind of interesting.
Can you make it bigger? You know, the
Yeah.
opposite of this.
So we'll have to move closer.
Move.
There you go. There you go.
There's a study called NHANES, which has been going on for over 20 years. It surveys, I think, 60 or 70,000 people in the United States, and they survey them every 2 years. And they ask kind of, what do you eat, how do you move, and what kind of chronic diseases you have, and they track this over time. Well, the sad thing is that for over 40% of adults in the prior month did absolutely zero physical activity. Kind of scary, right? Not even like getting out and walking. But the most common things were as you would expect: walking, bicycling, dancing, which is a great physical activity actually. A lot of coordination involved dancing, depending on who you are and how you're dancing. But at least you're out there dancing. And treadmill being the most common.
Yeah.
So there are some people that are physically limited in their ability to move. And, that's just a fact of life through, injuries or illnesses or what have you. But there actually are gentler movements that you can do. One of them is Tai Chi, which is a really great movement to help with balance as well as just gentle movement. The other one is, there is something called chair yoga. There's actually a great YouTube channel called Gentle Chair Yoga. For those of you that may be interested or know somebody that has physical limitations, you can do yoga in a chair. And it sounds kind of silly, but if you do that every day or every other day for 20, 30 minutes, you'll be amazed at how much flexibility and how much strength that you can gain over time. So I would encourage you to kind of check that out, either Tai Chi or chair yoga, if you have limitations. So I want to talk about muscle mass, and this is a graph that represents what happens to us over time. By the time that you're in your 60s to 70s, you have likely lost 25% of your overall muscle mass. And I think that that's pretty obvious from all of us in the room. We kind of look at each other and we know we don't have the muscle mass we had when we were younger. And that's due to a lot of different hormone changes. Growth hormone drops over time. Testosterone, which is present in both men and women, drops over time, and that contributes to maintaining your muscle mass. The real question is, can you maintain your muscle mass? So this is a young, buff 40-year-old and a pretty good-looking 70-year-old. And that picture, which is kind of small on these screens, actually, is there a way to turn these lights off?
Oh, yeah. Bob, can you get those?
Just the front lights. So for those of you that can see the picture, that is a MRI through your thigh, which is your femur and your thigh. And what you'll notice is on the upper one with the 42-year-old, it shows a fair amount of muscle, which is colored in that bluish color. And then the green is connective tissue. It just kind of connects your muscles to your joints and your ligaments. And the red, that little red brim is actually fat, just sits underneath your skin. But you notice as you're older, even though that's a pretty good looking 70-year-old, he has a lot more connective tissue, a lot more fat, and less muscle mass than the younger guy. That's just a function of aging. So this is a kind of an interesting test, or an interesting study that was done many, many years ago, before there were fitness trackers. They actually used pedometers. And the 24-year-old on the left, 66-year-old in the middle, and 66-year-old on the right. To orient you, this is the same thing on MRI through your thigh, where the dark gray is muscle, the white is fat, and that little donut you see is actually your femur, the bone with some bone marrow in the center of it. But look at the 66-year-old in the middle picture, right? A lot of fat, a lot of connective tissue, less muscle mass. But look at the 66-year-old on the far right. Now, it's not the same person, but it's representative of what the study showed, was walking 3,000 steps in the center versus 12,000 steps on the right made that kind of difference in your muscle mass. So that's why I tell people the best activity that you can do is walking. So if you can walk for 30 minutes, 40 minutes a day, 50 minutes a day, an hour a day, and getting out, especially as the weather's nicer, that is the best activity that you can do. I like to call walking outside with a friend a threefer, because you're moving, you're outside in nature, which is in itself a positive impact on your mental health, and hopefully you're with someone you really care about, or you want to be walking with them, so you get to enjoy the company of someone else and build that social connection. So this has been demonstrated in people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that you can actually reverse or rebuild muscle mass. So I say it's never too late to start, and it's never too early to start. So, questions about this? Okay. So I do think that
how do you get a snapshot of that? How you are right now? I guess that's an MRI.
Yeah, obviously that was during a study. There are these scales that will do bioimpedance. If you step on the scale, it'll measure the electrical conductivity, and your muscle will conduct differently than fat. It gives you, it's not perfect because it's not a medical device, right. But for a $30 scale to be able to track over time, it's good to see the trend over time. So if you're interested in doing it, the scales are very reasonable now. And when I go to my doctor, that's one of the things he measures. He has a medical grade scale, but it's basically very similar to what you can buy off the shelf for $25 or $30. Yeah. So the recommendation from the National Institute of Health is to move 30 minutes a day. So 150 minutes a week at a moderate pace. And that can be walking, that can be biking, that can be swimming, that can be any kind of thing. But I do think you need to add some type of strength training as part of it. Walking is a great way to build lower extremity strength. I also recommend things like squats, which we used to call deep knee bends, but now we call squats. Just bending down and bending up. And you can do that for 5 minutes. What are called lunges, where you step forward and step back, really works your quads. You can do planks, where you're down on the ground and just holding in a position. Great core exercise. What you want to try and do is build up your core muscles, which helps with stability and helps you be able to move through life, really, and be able to do those things like pick up your grandchildren, pick up the groceries, do all the stuff that you got to do around the house. So this is kind of my basic movement prescription, if you will. So I think you should move every day for at least 30 minutes. I think you need to be starting with walking. There was this really interesting study that was done with office workers, I think in Australia. And they took the two groups and they separated them. And they had half of them with a personal trainer for 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. And they said for the other half of the group, we want you to get up and move 6 times a day from your office and just walk around, 5 minutes a day. They checked cholesterol levels, typical biometric stuff, weight, all that other stuff, and they followed them over time. The ones that actually got up and moved 6 times a day for 5 minutes at a time actually had better results than the other group, which is kind of amazing to me. So all you got to do is get up, and it's these gentle movements that you need to do. That one's working.
No, her screen's working.
Yeah, mine's working. All right, let's see. There's always something. So I think you have this. I think this is actually in your notes, right? Yeah. Okay. So while we're seeing if we can get this back, switch. So that study that I was talking about, 5 minutes a day. How many people walk here on a not quite daily basis, but maybe 5 days a week? Well, that's great. That's awesome. So anybody do strength activities? Good. Awesome. That's excellent. Well, good. You guys already have the message. So what I recommend is twice a day, 2 days per week. There's something called Zone 2 training. We didn't talk a lot about cardiovascular health. So that's activity where you're going to get to the point where you can't carry on a conversation. So there's this concept called Zone 2 training, which it's been in the literature for mostly athletes, but now it's becoming very common, and you typically see people when they think about exerting themselves, they think of high intensity activities, right? They got to be doing like all out on a bike or on a treadmill or running. They're actually finding that people that do more Zone 2 activity, and Zone 2 is exercising or moving to the point where you can still carry on a conversation, but you're right at that edge of, if you were talking on the phone to somebody, they would know that you're doing something, right? So it's not like you're exerting yourself that you're breathless and you have to stop and breathe. You can still talk. So, but if you do that kind of activity twice a week, for 45 minutes to an hour. Granted, it's walking at a pretty brisk pace if you're walking, or walking on a treadmill at incline. That does a couple of things. It builds up your mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of your cells. They produce all the energy in your body. And it actually increases both the number and the efficiency of that mitochondria. It contributes to what's called metabolic health. So probably the people that have the best physical shape of anybody on the planet are professional cyclists, right? You think about the Tour de France. So those folks spend 70% of their training in Zone 2. So, you think they're the guys going all out, climbing, whatever hill they're climbing in France for their training, but they're not. They're spending 70% of their time in Zone 2 to kind of build that wide base, so that then they can do those more extreme measures. So if you haven't heard about Zone 2 training, I'd encourage you to kind of look on the internet about it. But you've got to do it for at least 45 minutes to an hour. You can't just do 20 minutes of it and you're good. So you got to build up to it. So if you're not used to doing it, that's fine. Start at 10 or 15 minutes and work up over time to try and get to 45 minutes to an hour twice a week. And that's been shown to do a lot of remarkable things: improve diabetes, lessen the risk of Alzheimer's, certainly improve cardiovascular health, all the things that we want to do. So I encourage you to build that in. You want to flip it over? Want to flip to the other side? Just like you.
Oh, yeah, we'll
plug
do
it
that.
to the other side.
It has nothing to do with this.
Yep.
That's not good.
No, that's, well, you should, I mean, technically, if you want to look at all the exercise physiology literature, you should spend a little bit of time in zone 4, but it's a small amount of time. That's like,
That's what I thought.
yeah.
Like, it's too.
Yeah, it's great to kind of max out what you're doing, but that should be a very small part of what you're doing. For most people, walking is best, walking at a brisk pace, bicycling if that's something you enjoy. I love biking, but some people like it, some people don't. But those are other things that you can do, but you don't have to always be pushing yourselves. I mean, we're taught in society that like unless you're pushing yourselves to the max, you're not getting that impact that you need, and this science says that's absolutely not true. You got to be able to doing something consistently for a period of time to build that kind of fitness. So, okay. All right. And I would encourage you. Yes.
I have one question on the strength training.
Yep.
Can yoga fit into that?
Absolutely, yoga's part of that. Yeah, yoga's great for balance and flexibility, certainly. Like Tai Chi or any of those kind of activities. Yoga is definitely, and I mentioned it the other day, yoga is great because there's a meditative component to yoga, there's a breath work component to yoga, and there's definitely a physical component to yoga. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, yoga can come in one of 100 different varieties, right? There's not just one type of yoga, and there's some very intense yogas that you can do. Oh, that's why it's not. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sleep. So your brain is 2% of your body weight, and it does 20% of all metabolic activity in your body. So think about that. 2% of your body weight, 20% of all the metabolic activity is done in your brain. That's done in your body. So if you think about that, metabolic processes, all they are is chemical reactions, right? The chemical reactions at the cellular level. And through any chemical reaction, what happens? You produce byproducts, right? You produce waste and other things that need to be removed. And when does that happen? It happens when we sleep, right? So what does happen when we sleep? Well, actually, there's a lot of really cool things that happen. Memory consolidation, ability to concentrate, muscle repair, and we'll talk about the different stages of sleep and how it affects different activity levels, different things in your body. Both mental and physical health, and we'll touch base on that. And better metabolic regulation. So people that sleep less have higher risks of diabetes and insulin resistance, just based on the fact that they're not getting the proper amount of sleep. So, bottom line is, if you can, get 8 hours of sleep a night. So what I tell my patients is, you may not be asleep for 8 hours, but the goal is to be in bed for 8 hours. You know, so you're getting usually about 7 hours of sleep. Because you can wake up during the night, as we all do, especially as we age, that we have to do other things. So this is how your body goes through what's called sleep cycles. There's 5 sleep cycles. There's stage 1 and 2, which are light sleep, where you're still moving around. There's stage 3 and 4, which is the deeper sleep, where you're kind of immobilized. And then there's stage 5, or REM sleep, which is actually not in stage 1, but it's actually a 5th stage, which is rapid eye movement, which is when we dream, right? And you typically go through this cycle in about a 90-minute time frame. So if you look at it, every 90 minutes you're kind of cycling through it, but notice what happens. In the early parts of the night, much more deep sleep, right? That's when your body does repair work. That's when you're repairing your cells, repairing all the chemical reactions that happen. Your brain goes through repair processes. And then as we go on, more and more REM sleep in the latter parts of the night. So the people that only say, I only need 6 hours of sleep. Number one, the science doesn't show that. Some people have a short sleeping gene. It's in about 2% of the population. And it means like you need a half hour less sleep than anyone else. So it's not like you need 4 hours and I need 8 hours. And actually they did these really cool studies. If anyone's interested in reading more about this, I highly recommend this book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. He's a neuroscientist who's written this really, really changed my mind about sleep and the importance of it. I mean, when I went to medical school and residency, right, all of my sleep cycles were totally messed up. And when you're young parents, your sleep cycles are totally messed up. But you really should endeavor to try and get 8 hours of sleep. But he wrote this fascinating book about, all the science behind sleep, the metabolic impacts it has. And one of the studies he cited was they put this group of people in a cave, completely dark. And so they basically tracked when they were moving and when they were sleeping. They were down there for like a week. I don't know how they did this. Completely dark. And they show that, in fact, for those people that had no idea of whether it was day or night, because they were in a cave, they slept for about 7.5 hours a night. So that's where that 7.5 to 8 hours comes in. So the people that are losing that latter part of sleep, you're losing REM sleep. Because if you're only sleeping 6 hours, and REM sleep's important because that's where higher cognitive function is. That's when we dream, and when your brain starts connecting all of these strange ideas that we have. That's actually an important part of your overall repair process, how you thin out the memories of those you don't need. And that's what REM does. It kind of parses through it, and anybody that remembers their dreams, you wonder, well, why was I dreaming about that? That's your brain trying to kind of connect all these abstract concepts. Yep.
So can you sleep too long?
You can actually. You can oversleep. People with depression certainly have trouble getting out of bed. So that's one of the signs of depression is they're constantly needing to be in bed, constantly fatigued, in bed for 8, 9, 10 hours. So yes, you can actually sleep too long. They think somewhere between 7 and 8 to 8.5 hours is kind of the sweet spot. And then for people that need more sleep, the question is, and I have patients with profound fatigue that come to see me, there's usually a reason for it that we have to look into.
So most of these things you're talking about change with age.
Yep.
You just said, does that change with age? The part about the 7.5 to 8.5 hours.
No, actually, looking at your sleep will get disrupted more as you age for the reasons that everyone knows about. But you don't need less sleep as we age. It's still in that 7.5 to 8 hour range. And actually, when we have our battles with our teenagers, they actually need more sleep. Although their brain is changing so much because of the hormone surges, they're just not able to do it. And their kind of circadian rhythm is pushed later on in the night. That's why they're not intentionally trying to upset you by staying up until midnight or 1 a.m. It's just kind of what their body clock is telling them to do. But no, over time, once you get past your teenage years, that 8 hour window has pretty much been consistent, at least in the studies, been consistently shown that that's what you need. And that's a reflection of people with dementia. It's interesting because people with dementia, and those of us that know or have had family members with dementia, know their sleep is very disrupted. They can't get to sleep, they can't stay asleep. We also know that early on in life, if you have sleep disruption, you put yourself at higher risk for dementia. So like people with sleep apnea and those kind of medical conditions, bless you, actually have a higher risk of dementia. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a chicken and egg. We don't know which came which, but it's definitely can impact you neurocognitively over time. So important thing to kind of pay attention to if you're having chronic sleep issues. So what happens when you get the product? Increased mood disorders and depression. Remember, when you sleep, there's two main hormones that your body regulates your daily cycle, right? There's cortisol, which when we get up in the morning, we typically see this cortisol surge, get you ready for the day, get you energized, and get you out of bed. And then in the middle of the day, cortisol starts dropping, and then melatonin starts going up. Melatonin is a hormone produced by the pineal gland, which sits in the middle of your brain, and basically it tells your body that it's time to start going to bed. Melatonin does a lot of things. It actually regulates your mood, regulates your immune system. It does a lot of different things. But one of the principal things that melatonin does is it tells your body it's time to go to sleep. And it's interesting because if you think about it, there's always a time in the evening hours, and this is classic when you're working and you have too many things on your plate, that there's a time in the evening when you just get really tired, right? You just hit you kind of start dragging. And you can push through it, just like all of us can push through it. So like at 9, 10 o'clock at night, most of the time you start getting that feeling like I'm tired, but a lot of us will stay up until 11 or 12 because you can push through it and do that. That's that kind of rising melatonin that's being released by your pineal gland that tells you, okay, it's time to go to sleep. And ignoring that is sometimes at your peril if you do that for a long time, because it actually can affect things like hormone over time, and this is over many years, hormone-sensitive cancers like breast cancer, uterine cancer, prostate cancer. They are hormone-related cancers. They affect the ability for those cancers to grow or not grow. And one of the hormones that we look at is melatonin. So you want to kind of pay attention to the cues your body is sending you. There's other things that we know. I talked a little bit about, remember we talked about, I think it was the first week, especially when it was about mindfulness, this concept of the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, the sympathetic being the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic being the rest or relaxation, and mindfulness, prayer, breath work, kind of trying to balance that system out. Well, if you're in a higher stress environment and you have more sympathetic tone, higher level of cortisol, a little bit tighter blood vessels, over time, that will actually put more stress on your body in very subtle ways that leads to strokes and cardiovascular disease. And if you're not sleeping, just the fact that you're not sleeping increases that sympathetic tone and puts you at risk for those chronic diseases. Weight gain certainly can affect some of your weight hormones, and higher levels of anxiety we talked about. And we already talked a little bit about exertion cognition.
I have a question.
Yep.
There's nights that I sleep like 4 or 5 hours and then they have difficulty getting back to sleep.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, we're going to talk a lot about that. Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a whole strategy involved in that we can talk about. So, anybody have trackers that they wear? Fitness trackers, sleep trackers? Yeah, there's lots of them out there on the market. I wear an Oura Ring, which is this little thing on my hand. There's Garmin, there's Fitbits, there's Apple Watches, there's even sensors you can put under your mattress, and some of the new beds come in with built-in sensors that can track your sleep over time. None of them are perfect. They all look at kind of trends. They will all tell you how much deep sleep you have, how much REM sleep you have, and give you kind of a sleep number or sleep efficiency number based on whatever algorithm they're using. I think they're good in a sense that if you're going to use that information to say, oh, okay, what did I do the day before? If I got a bad night's sleep, sometimes you know, and we'll talk about some of the things that give you a bad night's sleep. Some of them are pretty obvious, but sometimes it's not obvious. And if you use the information to actually make changes in your life, then that's a great thing. There are people that are very fixated on the data, and I have a patient that I actually told him to take off his Fitbit because he kept telling me he wasn't getting good sleep, which he did. He was getting good sleep. He was just fixated on the number that his Fitbit was telling him, I'm not getting good sleep. So that is a little bit of a double-edged sword. But they're helpful if you're going to act on the data that it gives you. And we'll talk about the things that can actually impact this. So, so how do you get better sleep? Say you wake up one time in the middle of the night, and we all have those nights where you wake up and you're not going to be able to get back to sleep. That's just kind of par for the course. So I kind of divide it into 3 main areas. About 40% of the adult population in the United States has some level of insomnia. It's one of the most common complaints that people get, or people complain to their primary care physicians about. It just is. It's kind of the world we live in, the stress that we're under, how we live our lives. It's just a very, very common thing. So I break it into 3 areas. The first one is minimize sleep disruptors. The second is what I call the glide path to sleep. And the third is the environment in which we sleep. So what is the most common thing that we take into our body that can be a sleep disruptor? Caffeine. Great. So caffeine has a half-life of 6 hours. So for those of you that have your cup of coffee at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, half of that will still be with your body, in your body, at 8 to 9 o'clock at night. There are people that are very fast metabolizers and people that are slow metabolizers. And you can do genetic testing for it, but you kind of know, right? If I have coffee in the afternoon, I have trouble sleeping. I have 1 cup of coffee when I wake up, and that's pretty much it. I've learned over time. My wife, Amy, she can drink a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock at night, has no problem going to bed. She's just that kind of person. So, I mean, you kind of know who you are. But for people that are having sleep problems, everyone wants to know, like, what supplement should I take? I'm like, okay, let's back up. Let's talk about all of these things first, and then we'll talk about, okay, if you need any kind of sleep supplement or anything like that. Other sleep disruptors that you take in your body. Alcohol, yeah. So alcohol has this wonderful effect on many of us that it makes us feel good, and sometimes will actually make us sleepy, right? I mean, it has a sedating effect in alcohol. The problem is once alcohol is metabolized in your body, it actually has the reverse effect. It becomes excitatory. So while you will go to bed fine, about an hour or two later, you will wake up or you will be tossing and turning. So what I usually recommend for those of you that have your wine at dinner, it's probably fine, because after about 3 hours, most of that alcohol is metabolized. But don't have a wine or your mixed drink or your cocktail or your nightcap right before you go to bed, because it's still going to be in your body and it's going to disrupt your sleep. And it's one of the most common sleep disruptors. Another common sleep disruptor that people don't think about is exercise. Exercise is great. It's a wonderful thing to do that we talked about, that everyone should do it. And should be doing something every day, but don't exercise in the evening hours, because it will raise your blood pressure, kind of pushes out all those adrenaline and cortisol, because in the short term that's what it does, because longer term it helps you out. So if you're going to exercise, recommend exercising earlier in the day or in the early afternoon hours, so all of those stress hormones are kind of out of your system. Sometimes it's not practical because you got to get the kids off to school, and you got to get home and make dinner, and the only time I get a chance for me is at 7 o'clock at night. That's the trade-offs that you kind of have to negotiate over time. So those are kind of the common sleep disruptors. We'll talk about the most common sleep disruptor in a minute, though. So what is the glide path to sleep? So think about like a pilot landing a plane, right? He goes through a checklist. He's going to do something every time that he lands, so he lands safely. So what I try and do, and what we do in our house, much to my wife's chagrin at times, is one of the most, remember we talked about melatonin release? The thing that will suppress melatonin release is bright light, right? So what you want to do is after 7 or 8 o'clock at night, you want to start turning down the lights or dimming the lights in the house, so that those bright lights are not having that negative impact on your melatonin release. My wife drives her crazy because she's working on her computer at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and I start turning down the lights. I'm really concerned about you getting a good night's sleep. That's not the response I get back, but that would be my recommendation. So the other thing is, like, have a routine at night. So I have a cup of herbal tea. That's one of the things that I do. I have chamomile tea, and I actually have a cup with my 12-year-old son, and that's kind of our routine in the evening hours. That's kind of a flag that, okay, it's time for us to start getting ready for bed. And you know, if you're going to do any kind of prayer or breath work or meditation, do it close to bedtime, because that will help to relax you to get you ready to sleep. And what else about the glide path?
How about reading?
What's that?
Reading?
Reading is great. So any one of these three categories can be influenced by the thing that we all carry in our pocket, right? Cell phones, cell phone companies have gotten smarter. They have night settings on them now that start dimming the screens and that kind of stuff. That's great. I mean, it's not only the fact that you're looking at a screen. Paper's fine, Kindles are fine because it's on a gray screen, and reading a book is perfectly fine. That's not a problem. And that's a great evening, late evening activity to kind of get your mind into a better place. So absolutely, reading is great. But I wouldn't be reading on your iPad, even if it's on a lighter setting. I think that light just influences you. And then, question? Other question? And then finally, the environment in which we sleep. So, does anybody know what the perfect temperature is according to science for sleep?
64.
58, 55.
67 to 68 degrees is what they say. Now, there are some in this room that are going to say, that's not hot enough, that's not cold enough. I get it. They make these really cool blankets that you can buy, that you can put on under your mattress or under your cover top that actually can control the temperature from one side of the bed to the other, for those of you that have a partner that likes it very hot or likes it very cold. But 68 degrees is kind of the temperature that everyone says. The rooms, your bedroom should be cold and dark, kind of like a cave, right? You think about, from whence we came. And if you live in an area where there's a lot of light pollution, then have light blocking shades on your windows, so that you can wake up. When you wake up, conversely, the best time is to wake up and get about 10 or 15 minutes of sun on your face, because that will, number one, suppress melatonin release. And it also is a signal to your brain to wake up. People that do that, those 10 to 20 minutes in the morning, especially now where we do have sunshine in the morning, getting outside, letting the sun be on your face for 10 or 15 minutes actually will help your sleep the following night. Because it's kind of resetting your circadian rhythm and that hormone release. And the environment also said, I like to tell this, sometimes I tell this in mixed company, so for those of you that are having trouble sleeping, the one thing I will say is your bed should be for one of two things. It should be for sleeping, and the other thing that we do with that. So you should not be like working on your computer while you're in bed. And it sounds kind of silly, but your brain then starts associating your bed with other things other than those other two activities that we know about. So if you're going to be doing work on your computer, get out of bed, go in a chair, go in another room. So when you get in bed, your body knows I'm getting in bed to sleep or to do that other thing. So, any questions on that?
Is TV bad then too?
TV is bad. Yeah, TV and now some people will say, look, that's the only time that we get together and it's our time to relax and it doesn't affect our sleep. That's fine. But for those, for folks that are having sleep problems, that's one of the things that I'd want to consider doing, looking at your TV somewhere else. Yeah. I have TV in my bedroom. I rarely look at it, but some people find that to be the relaxing time for reading. As long as you don't have trouble sleeping and it's on for 15, 20, 30 minutes and you go to bed, great. But if you have trouble getting to sleep or staying asleep, that's one thing I want to get on. Right. Okay, so this is a graphic off the NIH website. I think you have it in your handouts. Basically talks about all the things that I just talked about. The other thing that I would highly recommend is most of us, well, a lot of us set an alarm to wake up, right, in the morning. You should probably have an alarm to go to bed. So, like, it should probably be a signal to you, like, if you want to get 8 hours of sleep, you have to get up at 6:30 in the morning. About 10:30, you should start heading to bed. So you may want to set an alarm for like 9:30, so that your body knows, okay, it's time for me to start whatever process I'm going to do to get to bed. So I actually recommend for my patients, especially those with insomnia, if they're having trouble, set that alarm so it's kind of an audible reminder that, okay, it's time to start winding down for the day. And obviously the devices are certainly one of the things. So, questions about sleep? Yes, sir.
On the previous slide, you said in the middle.
Yep.
If you can't sleep,
Oh yeah, that's great. So what you don't want to do is clockwatch. Like there's people that'll toss and turn and have trouble sleeping, and then like, God, you look at the clock and it's 5 minutes later. Number one, hopefully it's just an alarm clock and not your phone, which should be across on the other side of the room. But if you have an alarm clock, after about 10 or 15 minutes, just get out of bed. We all have those nights where, we just don't have a good night's sleep. Don't try and force yourself to stay in bed until you fall asleep, because it'll actually set you up the following nights for it to be harder for you to sleep. So try and just get out of bed, make yourself a cup of tea, or just go downstairs, have a glass of water, whatever you need to do. Read the paper for about 20 minutes until you get tired, and then you can get back in bed. So that would be my recommendation. Yes, sir?
About like crazy leg syndrome,
Oh, yeah.
you know, where you just
there-
can't stop moving.
There are two medical conditions that I do check my patients for. One of them is sleep apnea, which is probably the most common thing that affects sleep and sleep quality, both you and your partners. But the other one is restless leg syndrome. There can be definitely some medical reasons for that. There can be some micronutrient deficiencies that you can have. For people that are having that, I usually start with magnesium, which is a great supplement you can take in the evening hours. It actually helps relax your muscles. It doesn't work for all patients with restless leg, but it actually does help a fair percentage of them. But that's a medical condition that some people have, that their legs will just not stop moving.
Well, there's something else if you got like nerve pain, and I mean like it's a hot poker in your leg
Yeah.
that pulsates.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean,
Yeah, there are people that have different kinds of neuropathic pain. Some of that can be related to certain vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Some of it can be, there's people, neuralgia, that kind of stinging nerve pain or that burning nerve pain is a very, very common thing. There are certainly some things that neurologists typically will look for to see if you have a medical condition that may be causing that. There's supplements called named alpha-lipoic acid. B vitamins are especially helpful for people with that. But yeah, absolutely. Neuropathic pain is a really, really hard thing to rid yourself of. Unfortunately, it affects, some of it can actually be food sensitivities too, in not a small percentage of people. So that's another thing to look into. But yeah, neuropathic pain, that burning pain is definitely something that's hard to get rid of and hard to diagnose and treat effectively.
So sleep apnea.
Yep.
I mean, I have sleep apnea, but I've been using a CPAP
CPAP, yeah.
for 12 years or
Yeah.
more. That
That's great.
negates it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I mean, sleep apnea. Think of it as, basically what you're doing is you're stopping breathing, right? The snoring is just the outward symptom. Although there are some people that have sleep apnea that don't snore.
Right, I don't snore.
Yeah. So perfect example. So absolutely, what you want to do is make sure that basically you're stopping breathing for 5, 10, or 15 seconds multiple times a night. So imagine if you stop breathing a couple hundred times while you're sleeping, you probably won't get a good night's sleep, right? No, but absolutely, sleep CPAP machines 100% correct that problem. Yeah, and all the medical symptoms. You can get hypertension from it. You can get a lot of other things, blood pressure variability, insulin resistance. All of those things come with sleep apnea. Yep, absolutely.
If you have the luxury, is there a downside to an afternoon nap?
Yeah, that's a common question. I think on an irregular basis, there's no problem taking an afternoon nap. If you're having to do it on a daily basis or 3 or 4 times a week, then there's probably something going on with your sleep cycle that we'd have to look into. But yeah, every once in a while, once a week, once every 10 days, having an afternoon nap. But if you have to do it consistently every day, probably something you'd want to look into. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
I was taking a lot of, but I'm not taking it now. During the pandemic, it seemed like I took melatonin.
Yep.
Is that bad to take?
No, melatonin is perfecly fine, very safe.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's usually 1 to 3 milligrams is what they recommend for melatonin. So a lot of people will ask, well, like, what supplement should I take? So melatonin is perfectly fine, very safe, absolutely. It's not a sleep medicine, like it doesn't knock you out. So for some people it does, and maybe it was effective for you. But usually you take it an hour or 2 before you go to bed, because it again, kind of tells your brain it's time to go to sleep. There are a couple of things that I usually prescribe for patients that have sleep issues. One of them is magnesium. Very common, mineral that about 40% of us are deficient in. So if you're going to take magnesium, you take magnesium glycinate, because some of the other ones can cause some GI distress, and you take 200 to 400 milligrams. You can actually go higher than that, but that's usually where I start out. There's a couple other very ancient herbs that are used, like valerian root, which is very safe, chamomile tea, and those kind of things. So those are pretty mild. So those are kind of things that I think about. Valerian root, magnesium, melatonin, they're all very safe to take. What I would caution against is if people are routinely taking like the Lunestas, the Ambiens, the clonazepams, the Ativans to get to sleep. Very good data that shows increased risk of dementia and actually increased risk of dying earlier if you're on those medicines chronically. If you have to take it every once in a while, you travel and you come back and you're jet lagged, that's perfectly fine. But if you're having to take it every night to go to sleep, that's definitely something you need to try and wean yourself off of, or talk to your doctor about getting out. And those studies are very clear that they're not helpful to be used long term. Trazodone is actually a very good medicine if you're asleep. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a trazodone. Yeah, trazodone was originally marketed as an antidepressant. It was actually found to be not a great antidepressant, but what they found is it's actually really good for sleep. It doesn't disrupt sleep cycles, because the problem with Ambien and Ativan and clonazepam, all of these kind of Valium-like medicines, is it actually disrupts your sleep architecture. That those 5 stages of sleep we talked about, it totally blows those out of the water. Trazodone actually doesn't do that. So it's actually a fine medicine to take for people that have trouble sleeping.
Where do the Somanexes and those kind of things
Yeah,
into this?
I think the over-the-counter ones like Somanex, a lot of them have diphenhydramine, which is Benadryl, in it as part of it. And anybody that's taken a lot of Benadryl knows it just makes you tired. And that's perfectly fine. So I don't think there's any problem taking those intermittently if you need to, but not on a regular basis, that you're having to take it every night. So. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the blue zones. So mentioned it a couple of times, and I think I mentioned this either last week or the week before. Bluezones.com. If you want to know how long you're going to live, go to bluezones.com, put in all your data, and it'll tell you when you're going to die. So it asks for a lot of it asks for some lab data like your cholesterol and triglyceride and headache. So you have to have some of that information available. But it's actually kind of a cool website. It's got a lot, and then it tells you, of course, if you're living shorter than you're predicted, these are the things that you should probably do based on all the information you put in. So it's actually a pretty cool website. So what did they find out? So there are 5 areas of the world: Sardinia, Italy; Okinawa, Japan; Loma Linda, California; Costa Rica, and I think somewhere in Greece. That they basically found these people that were living groups of people that were living much higher than expected over 100 years of age.
They added a group from the US now too.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Small town California.
Yeah,
Well, Loma Linda.
Yeah.
Yeah, Loma Linda. No, there was one. I thought there was one in Pennsylvania that they added recently. But they're constantly looking at this. They walk a lot. So they looked at these areas and they said, well, what are the commonalities for it? So these are very diverse geographic areas, right? Okinawa, Japan, and Loma Linda, California are obviously very different places. But what were the common things? Well, not surprisingly, it was all about family, not smoking, having a primarily plant-heavy diet, not exclusive, but plant-heavy. Constant moderate physical activity. What was the most common activity that was common to these 3 areas?
Walking,
Close.
chopping wood.
Okay, I'll take it, but
Gardening.
gardening. We say gardening. Yeah, gardening. Yeah, that was the most common thing. And think about when you garden, right? You're getting down, you're bending down, you're pulling weeds, you've got your hands in the soil, which I think is therapeutic in itself. That was the most common activity of these 3 areas. Social engagement and legumes or beans. Those were common to all of those areas. Now, beans get a bad rap sometimes. Beans are complex carbohydrates. Some people can't tolerate them because of the carb content. and it has a tendency for some people to raise your blood sugar. But they actually are a very healthy way of eating for most people in the right amount. Not like you're going to have a pound of beans. And then there's other things that you can see, obviously. You know, wine in Sardinia, Italy, turmeric in Okinawa, Japan, an Asian spice that's used in cooking all over the world. Nuts in Loma Linda, California. So there's all these other things that are all the things that we've talked about over the last 2 or 3 weeks, right? These are the healthy habits that we all should be building. And then it kind of comes down to what's called the Power 9, which is a sense of purpose, being able to downshift, having this kind of plant slant, this 80% rule, which I gotta tell you, that's a hard one for me. It's like the 80% rule when you're eating is like when you're 80% full, push yourself away from the table. That one's a hard one for me. So the theory is behind that is most of us eat fast, right? We're not mindful eaters, right? We're trying to shovel food in our mouth as fast as we can. At least I'm in that camp, certainly when I was working. When you eat, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes for the signal to get from your gut to your brain that you have had enough food. So that's where that 80% rule comes in, because by the time you're 80% full, you probably really are just full. You're just continuing to eat because your brain hasn't gotten the signal that you're, okay, you can stop eating now. So it makes sense, but that's just a hard one for me. Right tribe, loved ones, belonging, and moving naturally. So all the things that we talked about. Like I said, simple things, but not easy. All right, questions? All right, here's where it all comes together. All right, so Harvard did this analysis of these two large population databases called the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professional Study. And I think I referenced it in this handout. There's like 110,000 people that they followed for like 25 years. So, and what they did is they tracked lots of different things, right? They tracked what they ate, they tracked how active they were, they tracked chronic medical conditions, and they tracked if you died or not. Because they looked up death records if you didn't return your survey. And the study is still going on. And so you had to do 4 of 5 things, right? And I think I listed them. For some reason, I always forget one of them. So one is eating a plant-heavy diet, high vegetable content. One is to never smoke or stop smoking if you haven't. Once you pass the 20 or 25-year mark after you stop smoking, you're pretty much at a baseline of a non-smoker. So you have to get past that 20 or 25-year mark. So that's one. Move naturally. And move every day, and maintain a healthy body weight, a good BMI. So, and alcohol for ladies, 1 drink a day. For men, 2 drinks a day. That was it. So if you did 4 out of 5 of those, you didn't have to do all 5 of those, but if you did 4 out of all 5 of those, for women, they found you lived on average disease-free 10 years longer. For men, sorry guys, we only get 7 years, but you know, close to 10 years. So, all you got to do is 4 out of 5 of those. High quality diet, moderate alcohol intake, don't smoke, keep moving, maintain a healthy BMI. So, like I said, it's simple, it's not easy. So here's where we try and pull it all together. You know, the first week we talked about mindfulness and things that people were going to do. So since we have a little bit of time, I intentionally left a little extra time. And just let me know what the cap scored. You got
We're up 1-0.
We are.
Oh, we are.
Benefit
of the hour.
Always good to get the first goal. Always good to get the first goal. All right, so at your table, and maybe you can share amongst your friends, what are the 4 things, one in each of these areas, that you're going to do to try and make yourself a little bit healthier and give yourself some of those things? So I'll let you talk about yourself.
I'm the opposite.
So I'm gonna sign you in. You know, judge.